And welcome back to another new exciting episode with Eliot Crist. This week, our Dynasty Mind series is talking about how to build your process. We've had wonderful guests come up, and today's guest is just as exciting for me because right now he is the hottest name on the Twitterverse, talking about fantasy prospect, talking about drafts. He is the host of DraftDailyPod. Eliot Crist, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you calling me one of the hottest names on Twitter. I don't know if I would go that far, but people have been responding well to my work and to the Draft Daily podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you recently hit a new milestone in followers, 9,000 and going up, and that is a fantastic achievement. I've been in the Twitterverse since 2013, and I've seen a lot of the analysts come and go. I've seen a lot of people gain notoriety, and you are just rising at a very quick rate. You can almost call yourself like the Deshaun Watson of this year.
Okay. I don't know if I'm ready to call myself the greatest thing that's ever happened to mankind, but no, I'm just kidding. But I appreciate that, man. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, people are coming to you. You have been inviting great guests to break down different prospects that we can expect for this upcoming rookie class, and it's an exciting class.
Yeah, absolutely. So every day I put out one new podcast, so I try to get through 7 a week, and each day is with a different guest. I mean, this week we've done Minka Fitzpatrick with Evan Silva. Next week I got Sigmund Bloom coming on to talk Kiki Kuti. They're whatever player you want to know about in this draft class, I'm going to hit them at some point, whether it's a top defensive prospect, an offensive lineman, or obviously for dynasty purposes, I'm going to go real deep into the quarterback, running back, tight end, and wide receiver class with some of the brightest minds in the industry.
Awesome. Yes, we are. I, for one, am excited about all these people that you invite because they are people that I do trust with my processes. And having their input is just not only your sense, but you'll get to bounce your ideas with a lot of these analysts in the field of football. So tell me, we have the combine this week. We have something exciting coming up, and tomorrow will be the first time we'll actually see some workout. And of those, particularly interested for dynasty owners are the running backs. We have the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends on Saturday, and then we'll close out the week with more IDP kind of focus. Tell me, what are some of the things you get excited for in this combine mode?
Well, I think the combine's really interesting because I think it's an important piece, but I think some people make it the only piece, and that's a mistake. And then some people don't count it at all, which is also a mistake. The way I personally view it, I think the 40 time might mean the least amount of all the different tests, but it's the thing that people get most excited about. I try to look back at their times and see if it matches up with their tape. I think it's really important not to double count things. So what I mean by that is, like last year, for example, John Ross was a name that if you watched his film, you could just tell he could flat out fly. And then he runs an incredible time. People were expecting him to run like a 4.28, 4.27, kind of be in consideration for breaking that. That was the guy they were talking about, right? And then he broke it, and then everyone starts shooting him up the draft board, and they go crazy. And it's like, well, you already counted this in your process evaluation, so you don't want to double count it. Or conversely, a guy like Mike Williams, people were like, you know what? I don't think he's very fast. I think he's going to run in the 4.5s. And that's what he ran in his pro day. And people like, I told you, I'm dropping him down the board. You really want to make sure that you don't go crazy. So a guy last year that's a good example was Chris Godwin. His tape did not say 4.4 speed. So you go back and you try to figure out what it is, if it's play speed, if he got stronger, you try to figure out explanations. For the most part, I go into the combine with expectations on how someone's going to test athletically. So, for example, tomorrow, I expect Saquon Barkley to test out of the roof. I'm not going to move him. He can't really go any higher than he is now, but like I can't raise his evaluation that much more because I already expect him to do that. And then I also, just because someone might not test terrifically, if their film is terrific and their production is really good and there's a lot of other signs, I'm not eliminating them from my draft board or going to drop them too much. Dalvin Cook's a guy last year that I had going into the combine, RB1, and then some of the concerns dropped him to RB2 for me. But he was someone I was still really high on because a lot of his game doesn't necessarily translate to agility drills, for example. Like his cuts aren't necessarily strong jump cuts. They're more to get guys out of position, and that might not test well. But if I had to pick one thing that matters most to me, I would say the 3-cone drill in general, because it shows agility and quickness, and especially with receivers and pass catching running backs, it's going to give you a sense of how well they can win in space, or win at the line of scrimmage, or kind of create that separation, which we're looking for out of our pass catchers.
I think you put it in a fantastic way, and that's sort of something that I factored in now, that I pay more attention, less to the 40s, which is an exciting thing. It's always going to be a highlight of NFL Network when they show the combine, but more towards some of the more skill drills and type of testing that might translate better and have a better correlation to on-field production on Sunday for the NFL players. So you already begin to delve into some of your process of evaluating players, what they look for in your eyes, the film, the stats, everything that you try to put together. Help us, for those for our audience, people who want to learn about how Eliot Crist thinks. In your own word, what does it mean to have a process in Dynasty football, and discuss the importance of having a process, and explain what your process is currently?
So I think it's really important to go into anything in life with a game plan, and Dynasty football is not going to be any different. So listen, I don't expect everybody to sit down and try to watch 100, 150, 200 prospects like I'm going to do this draft season. That's not realistic. So what I tell people who don't want to do that is, you want to get about 4 to 5 guys that you really trust. You don't want to create this giant pool, because otherwise you're going to be able to pick from too many different people, and you're going to have too many different opinions. And you really want to find 4 or 5 guys that you really trust and start to lean on their opinions for the film thing. And then you want to do some of your own research as well. But you want to decide in general, because I think anyone that plays Dynasty football is a football fan, right? And so you want to think about what's most important in football and in fantasy football, and where is the league headed, because those are the kind of players that you get ahead on other people with. So a guy like Christian McCaffrey is a good example last year, where there were questions about whether or not he could run between the tackles, and people are calling him a bust. And, that's not true from a football sense or a dynasty sense or a fantasy sense, because what he was a weapon and a receiver, and he got those 100+ targets, and that's incredibly valuable. And what we're seeing the league go towards in general is more value for receiving backs. I mean, you saw a guy like Chris Thompson last year. He may not have gotten the 15 to 20 touches that a 2-down back may get, but his touches were way more valuable. So when you look at running backs, you may want to really say, all right, who are the guys that are going to catch passes? Not necessarily just have the production, but who are the guys going to profile in those roles? And that's what I really look to attack in running backs, because I think you can find a lot of 2-down guys that become a dime a dozen in the NFL. I mean, you're talking about teams in the NFL pass 64% of the time, and that's including teams like Carolina and Jacksonville, who still play that old school power eye football. So if you eliminate them, it becomes closer to like 68 or 70% of the time. So you really want to focus on guys that can take advantage of that. And one thing that fantasy players don't seem to care about, that I maybe care about too much, is pass blocking ability with these running backs, because one of the things you always hear, and Peyton Manning used to talk about this all the time, you're not touching my field unless you can pass block. And some of these guys, like Rashad Penny's a great example, that he's a really, really good 2-down player. He didn't have much receiving production. He didn't have a developed route tree. It's something he struggled with. And he's the worst pass blocker in the class. And there are a lot of things to really like about him. But if he becomes a 2-down guy, it's going to drop him down draft boards, which is then going to impact his role in the NFL. So I think it's really important to understand what you're looking for out of players and really attack that in general. I know you're a big Mark Walton guy, right? So you want to talk about what Mark Walton's going to bring to a team. He's not going to bring 20 to 25 touches a game. He's going to bring that change of pace, win in space, kind of catch a lot of passes, break down linebackers in space. And the other thing about him is he's a great pass blocker. So teams are going to feel very comfortable with him in that 3rd down role. And we've seen what that does. I mean, even look like a guy at James White, right? James White there weren't James Whites in the NFL 10 years ago. And now James White's a guy that might catch 8 touchdown passes a year and put up almost wide receiver 3 production out of the running back position. So I really think those are the kind of guys we're really trying to find. And then in receivers, it's tough to draft receivers before the draft, and I know some dynasty leagues do that, but so much about a receiver's landing spot and what role he's going to fall into. But with the receiver, the thing I wanna see if he wins and how he wins. So, if he's a bigger guy, I don't need him to run as elite routes. If he's a smaller guy, like that's how he's gonna have to win. What's his contested catch rate? How does he run the route tree? How does he win in the red zone? Because these are all the things we're looking for in fantasy, right? Because the more you can get open, the more likely you are to get the football, and the more you win contested catches and win in the red zone, the more likely you are to get touchdowns, and the more likely fantasy owners are to win games.
Yeah, absolutely. You put in some of the things that I'm recently putting more emphasis into, and that is looking into the context of football. The league has shifted way more towards a pass heavy, so pass blocking becomes a skill. I think one of the things that you talk a lot about in your podcast is running backs that can run routes, not necessarily catch dump offs and just take off, because it increases their volume, it increases their fantasy production potential. And those are all the things that I'm considering, because during the time that I started, a lot of emphasis was on which running back can run between the tackles and can just carry 2-3 defenders with him into the end zone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to follow up on that point real quick, is we keep hearing, this guy can catch. And quite frankly, unless he's Jordan Howard, I expect him to be able to catch. I don't really care that much. The thing that gets me excited, and I've talked about this endlessly with Saquon Barkley, but you put me on your podcast, so I'm going to say it one more time, is the thing that makes Barkley such a special talent is the fact that, he's not just going to run these flare dump off routes and catch the ball and turn the ball upfield. He's going to run wheel routes. He's going to run pivot routes. He's going to, he can split out wide or in the slot and get matched up on linebackers. And these are really how those big plays happen. And that's what I'm worried about, on top of just catching the ball. Because, yeah, like a guy like Darius Guice absolutely can catch. I don't know if he can run those routes because I haven't seen it. He has some traits absolutely that say he can. And that's one of the things you look for with the 3-cone time, because that's going to tell you a lot about someone's route running ability. And then, in the drill, this is the first time a lot of these guys are going to go through a gauntlet, and they're going to have to show their ability to catch the ball and catch the ball away from their body and how comfortable they are doing all that stuff. But, yeah, I think that with running backs, we keep just saying it doesn't matter if they have a lot of catches. They can catch the ball. And to me, it's like, I'm not worried about whether or not he can catch the ball. He's going to play in the NFL. These guys should be able to catch. I'm worried about his route running and ability to win in space and break down linebackers, because those are the guys that become weapons in the NFL.
Absolutely. I think you've made a fantastic point there that people should take away with this, is that we are looking for people who meets a baseline, but not just people who can meet a certain baseline. We want them to exceed it. So those are the players that will win us the games on Sunday or Monday night, wherever the week concludes. So that's a good point. The other point I don't want our audience to miss is that you mentioned that wide receivers are really tied into their landing spot and the scheme fits, and that is something new, and that is something I will definitely pay attention to for myself. So going into our next topic of discussions, you mentioned 4 to 5 people that you trust, that you have the ears of. Who might be some of those people that you'll listen to and that you'll definitely help you clarify your thoughts?
So my list might be 10 long, just because what I try to do in general, though, is I do all my own research before I talk to anybody else, so no one else is influencing me, right? Like, I have people ask me to read their work about a guy that I haven't watched yet, and I say, like, remind me, like, in a couple weeks, and I have no problem doing it, but I don't want that to influence what I'm seeing. There are a couple guys at PFF that I talk to all the time. I mean, Brett Whitefield is a guy that I talk film with probably 10 times a day about different players and what we're seeing, and because if we're normally on the same page, and when we're not, we're trying to figure out what we're seeing differently. Scott Barrett is someone I talk to a lot about his data, and when we sit down and watch film together, he's more learning the film aspect from me, but he's constantly pointing out different things in data. Last week I sat down and talked with JJ Zachariason, just trying to figure out what his data is telling him, because he's he's saying what the most important things are in the NFL. And one of the things he talked about was, a running back's not worth a first-round pick, but Saquon Barkley is the exception to that rule. And then, I talked with Evan Silva about the pass blocking thing, and he's like, yeah, it might not matter to fantasy, but it's going to matter to NFL coaches, which is going to impact their ability to get on the field. So I want to talk to different people that are very smart in different aspects of the game and see if not only my evaluations match up with theirs, but if my thought processes make sense from other smart people. I mean, there's so many smart people. It's hard for me to leave any out. If you're looking for a guy that's really coming up in the draft Twitter game, I don't want to mess up his handle, but his name is JR. You can follow him on Twitter at JReed Draft Scout. I talk to him once, twice a day as well about all the guys we're watching. I think we've disagreed about maybe 3 guys in the last 60 days. So he's someone that I bounce a lot of ideas off of. And, the other thing I try to do is I'm mostly film-based, right? So, and I know there's this breakout age and there's this college dominator and all that stuff. And I think I've dismissed that more than I should have in the past. I want to learn about that. I want people to talk to me about that and try to continue to take as many pieces of the puzzle as I can. Kentley Platt, I think his name is Math Bomb on Twitter. He's actually coming on my podcast on Monday. I guess that's a shameless plug, but he's developed a system called the RAS, which basically tells you how important each combine drill is for each position, and he rates all these people in these different ways, and you can kind of really see how someone did it as an athlete in the combine. So there's so many different things you can pull, but I try to find people to talk about my thought processes, talk about film with, talk about data, and talk about combine, and those are some of the people that I really trust.
Awesome. Those are some of the familiar names that I also would agree with you. I can vouch for them. I think the RAS was very helpful for me last year as well. So hopefully they'll gain more followers, and people should follow them. So it sounds like these are JRs, especially, are someone that you're willing to have disagreements. So both of you would you still respect his takes, and then helps you go back to your process and see what you may have missed, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that's really important about this is that people are going to disagree about prospects, man. Like, you're watching 200. If I'm talking to all these guys, we're watching 200 guys. We're not going to have the same exact evaluation and everything. One, don't take it personally, right? That's the thing I've learned, is that you're not attacking my brother. Like, other than Deshaun Watson, like, go ahead and say whatever you want about any prospect. But on a serious note, just, if someone disagrees with what your thought process is, try to see what they're seeing and then have those conversations. Maybe they value something more than you do, and you value something more than they do. Like, a lot of the pushback I've got on Saquon Barkley is that his vision isn't great. And I think that people have kind of picked out 15 plays and they're really harping on him. But and people talk about his ability to run through contact's not great, but Graham Barfield did his study and it was the same as Leonard Fournette. So to me, that you're really starting to try to look for different things, and then people tell me his receiving is not that important. And once I get to that stage, I can kind of say, okay, I'm not sure you and I agree in terms of where the league's heading, what the most important traits are, but there are plenty of guys that I see something with and other people see other things with, and I try to, whenever I do that, I'm trying to talk to them about what they see. Sometimes it's just we value different traits more than the other person. But if we're seeing different things, oftentimes I'll go back to the film and try to watch it with that eye perspective and see if I could see that. But I think whenever you talk to different people and you disagree, instead of just entrenching yourself more, you want to try to figure out if you can see that as well. Maybe that person doesn't know what they're doing. Maybe that person just saw 4 highlights and they're running with that, because there are plenty of people like that too. But if you're talking to people, try to use the information that they're giving you and see if you can learn something from that as well.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. We definitely need to come in with an open mind, know that we're humans, where everything that we see, we put together, it is driven by certain things that we had success in the past, or that we know how to when to avoid, but it's not 100% correct. And it's important to have those people that you can trust to kind of bounce ideas off of that. So putting some of those things together, we are in the middle of a tumultuous off season as far as fantasy value wise. Fantasy values can shift at a moment's notice because of the combine that's coming up, because free agency that might impact it, and then we have the draft upcoming, we have training camp, and then we have preseason. How do you? What is your process to just guide you through this time of fluctuating values, and how you proceed with buy or selling a player?
I think so much of that is league dependent. You know what I mean? There are a lot of these people that are doing Dynasty. They're looking for action. You know what I'm saying? They get bored and they want to start trading, and you take advantage of that. You take advantage of BS reports and see if you can take it. You know what I'm saying? If you can sell high. I mean, whenever you play Dynasty football in general, I think no piece should ever be viewed as untouchable. You want to try to constantly buy low on guys you think are going to do well and sell high on other guys. I mean, Samaje Perine a perfect example, where there was a report on RotoWorld that came out this week that said he's going to be the guy. And then less than 24 hours later, there was another report like, oh, maybe not. They're looking to add an actual running back in the draft this year. So to me, if you had that 24-hour window, start talking to people, see if anyone's interested, see if you can sell him for something more than you're worth. Or the other thing is try to predict decline. I mean, this can get difficult, but with fantasy players and football players in general, a lot of them fall off a cliff. So one of the guys that I'm selling on right now is Leonard Fournette, just because I think his rookie year was overrated in terms of he's going to carry the volume, but I think you saw him get nicked up some. I don't think he's going to be able to continue that pass game production as much, because almost all of it was dump offs. He wasn't really running routes like we were talking about earlier. And a lot of his success came from big plays. I think Scott Barrett's got something that if you take away his two best runs, his yards per carry is equal to Mike Gillislee. But if I can trade Leonard Fournette, like, I'm not giving away Leonard Fournette. Let me make that very clear. But if I have Leonard Fournette and people are treating him as this top 5, top 10 fantasy asset, and I can get someone that I think is a better asset, then I'm absolutely making that trade. So I think that you want to try to predict decline. You want to test the market constantly. And the more active you are, I think the better in any league.
Nice. I think that's a good advice for people to follow, is just keep their ears pinned. Also, be certain that their values are not extraordinary, or go to an extreme. Like you said, Fournette might be a form of a sell candidate, but it's not. You're not trying to give him away. You're not trying to just sell him because you're predicting a decline, but it has to give a return to you that you feel comfortable with. And the Fournette, I've heard the Fournette noise started way early in the offseason, and now I'm on this side of waiting to see how far his value will fall, and then I'll make a decision what to do with him.
That's a great point too, that if people are trying to sell someone, and you can wait people out too. Like that's the opposite approach, and I think that's a really important one too. Like if I'm in a league with Fournette, and let's say that I think right now his price tag is a top 10 dynasty asset, and I view him in like the 20 range, right? But then someone is getting nervous because they hear all these reports and they're trying to sell him in the 35 range. Then I'm taking advantage of it. So it's not black and white. It's really a gray area in fantasy. And the other thing I think is really important, and I didn't mention this, is this time in the offseason, we are about to hit free agency in like 14 or 15 days. So if you can start getting a sense of where a couple guys might go and what positions that open up for other players, or like Kirk Cousins, Michael, the Jets, all of a sudden Robbie Anderson and Quincy Enunwa stocks are going to go through the roof. If you can predict some of those moves, you can get extreme value on players.
Excellent. Yes, we are very looking forward to that. Those are some of the markers where I call the value shifters. It'll start getting people to start thinking about players that they want to acquire or trade away. And free agency and the draft are two of the bigger ones in the offseason. So Dynasty is very much a full year-round kind of game. And if you don't pay attention and wait until the season starts, you're already behind the game. So we really appreciate all learning from your process. And so we're headed into our final segment, which I call the Rorschach Inkblot test, a quick way for you to put together your process. And I'm going to be throwing out to you just names, and you'll let me know, what does your process tell you about these players, and what are you looking forward to them for 2018 and beyond. My first one to you is Donta Foreman.
Buy. So I was a little bit lower on Foreman coming into the draft last year. I had some questions about his game. He looked excellent as a rookie before he tore his ACL. So this is the exact situation I was just talking about. Lamar Miller is probably going to be a cap casualty, and they don't have any picks in the first 2 rounds, so they're unlikely to be able to add a running back, which might be considered a luxury pick. So you could be getting Donta Foreman, a guy that's about to be a second year that looked really good his rookie year in a workhorse role without paying the workhorse price tag. So I think that he's an absolute buy.
Nice. That's good to hear. Next one for you, Josh Doxson.
I think he's hold. I like Doxson coming out a lot. I think that his game is a lot of vertical stuff down the field, and that Alex Smith doesn't necessarily do that incredibly well, though he did it much better last year. But at the same time, as of right now, there's not a ton of other targets to take away from him. I know they have Jamison Crowder and Chris Thompson, but I mean, a slot receiver and a running back aren't necessarily going to take away that role. And Doxson does kind of sit in that position to lead the team in targets. So he's the kind of guy that I would buy low on or sell high on, but based on his current market value, I would probably hold him.
All right. Awesome. And my last one to you is a quarterback, one who could have won the Super Bowl, but he did put the team into a position to win it, Carson Wentz.
So I hope you don't have too many Eagles fans listening to this podcast, but I would say sell. But before I explain why, I will say that it matters if it's super flex or not super flex, because that's a huge difference in value in terms of a quarterback. But anytime I can sell any quarterback in non-super flex, I'm doing it for any kind of value, because quarterbacks really lose value in a 12-team league where you only need to start one. When you need to start two, the only way I would sell Wentz is at extreme markup, because he's unlikely to produce the same kind of numbers he did last year, just because he was so efficient. He's not going to throw 4 touchdowns a game on 25 passes. He was putting up 220 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like, that's unlikely to continue. So it's one of those things where it's tough, because I do think he's going to be a quarterback for the long term. You're talking about dynasty. He could be the face of your dynasty team for 10, 15 years. So if you're going to sell Wentz, you're selling at an incredibly high price tag. So super flex, I would test the market to see if someone will completely overpay for him, because I think he's the kind of player that you could sell for an overpay right now, especially to an Eagles fan that's just excited about winning the Super Bowl. But if it's not super flex, my rule in general, like even if you ask me to Deshaun Watson, I'm going to say sell quarterbacks in non-super flex leagues every single time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's a good distinction to make between non-superflex and superflex. The plan may differ a little, the value may differ a little, but you have your process in how you evaluate quarterbacks. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the pod. I've learned a lot. I hope our audience are able to take away a lot too and apply it to their dynasty experience, whether they are a beginner or a seasoned veteran. There's a lot to learn from tonight, and I want to thank you for that. Anything that you want to share tonight, Eliot?
First, thanks for having me on, man. I hope that any of this was helpful to people that listen. I'm not trying to just plug myself, but if you guys follow me on Twitter and you ask me literally any question, if I don't respond, it's just because I didn't see it, and you sent me a question while a bunch of other people did. So ask me again, and I will answer it. It really doesn't even matter what the question is. But anything football related, I'm always happy to talk to. I'm always happy to explain my process. I'll sit down and talk to you about whatever I see. I think there's so much on Twitter to love about the process, and there's so much on Twitter to hate, where people just get angry and really try to turn this into a me versus you thing over different prospects. And I'm really trying to push forward through that and create this ability and space for people to talk, because just because I may study more football than you, or I may know more about X's and O's than you, doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation. And I'm not going to talk over your head. My goal is to try to advance here for football knowledge and have you help me too, because I talked earlier about watching film with Scott Barrett. When I started watching film with him last year, he didn't recognize a lot of what he was seeing, and me being able to explain everything to him helped him, but it also helped me a lot. So every time you guys ask me a question, I have to talk about my process, or I have to talk about a prospect, and it helps me get better as well. So I really appreciate just anyone that reaches out and tries to have an open conversation about prospects, because I think I can help you, and I know for a fact it helps me.
Excellent. So you hear it here, everyone. Eliot is open to answering your question. Why don't you give a plug of your Twitter handle and then where people can find your work, and then we'll sign off from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at Eliot Crist, ELIOT CRIST. You would think that name's not the most difficult to spell, but it is. 1 L, 1 T, and no H in Crist, no relation to Jesus. You can find me on Twitter there. Basically, all my work is on Twitter. I do work for Power Hour for DFS. I do some work over there at PFF, but nothing that's published right now. And then the Draft Daily podcast is a thing I do every single day. I'll tweet out links to it, but every day, new guest, new player. We're going in depth on them, 15 to 20 minutes, from player comps to the best landing spot for the player, to their strengths, to their weaknesses. Try to paint an entire picture for you and really expand your knowledge on the entire class without having to do a ton of research. And then last thing is that every single day on that player, I tweet out a GIF thread about 15 to 20 plays and try to explain the different traits, whether it's strengths, weaknesses, concerns, their production as well, in terms of giving you a couple visualizations to go with the podcast and me explaining certain plays.
Yeah, definitely. You put in a lot of work to those, and I personally do enjoy the threads. You mentioned DFS. I missed the the advice you give out, but I am a member of Power Hour, so I don't have to miss those anymore. Thank you so much, Eliot. Really appreciate you coming on to my show. I am at FF Dynasty 101, and you hear our Dynasty Mind, and I hope to see you next week. Bye, all.